It's time now to look at the weekend newspapers, and to help me make sense of the headlines, I'm joined in studio by the Deputy Editor of the Mail and Guardian, Bureaugard Tromp, as well as Bulelwa Mabasa. She is a land reform expert, and she's also a lawyer and part of the, she is in fact the President's advisor on land reform. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio. Bulelwa, let's start right off with you. I just addressed the African National Congress's Dakota Lekwete on the question of land reform. From where you're sitting, what are you telling the President about the pace of the process and what's happening in Parliament?
Look, as part of the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reform, we published our report in a 144-page document, and I think the message was very clear that this issue is an urgent one, that is a constitutional issue, that it's an issue that is required for, for justice. But I think most importantly, we did set out some steps which government can take almost on an immediate basis to release land. And we have been told that the process to release land, the rapid land release program has already started. I think what is going to be required is more clarity with regards to what is that land being used for and for what purpose. Because obviously it's one thing to release land, but if it's not for land reform purposes, and if it's not clear who the beneficiaries are, then we're kind of still in the dark. Interestingly enough, there's also the policy that has been published to determine who the beneficiaries of land should be, separate categories, and that's out for comment. We also know that the expropriation bill is out for comment to the public up until the 31st of January. And of course, you mentioned the parallel parliamentary processes that are taking place as well. So lots that's happening in the land reform space that's going to require a lot of transparency and a lot of movement from all quarters.
Absolutely, and of course that is going to be a big part of what we need to look out for. And of course, Bureaugard, this is also what investors are looking toward. Yesterday we saw, for example, a sea change the last 48 hours in terms of the approach to dealing with Eskom. We had the board chair falling on his sword. We expect more board members to fall on their swords. If the board is reconstructed at Eskom, does it solve the crisis, though, at Eskom?
I don't believe so. I think that, look, Jabu Mabasa was sitting in a situation which was untenable. He was the board chair and he was CEO. I mean, you're not supposed to have that. That is the worst of governance. Not only bad governance, it is terrible. But it was a crisis situation. And that is South Africa a lot of the time, unfortunately. So, look, this was, I don't believe it was a case of, no, but you lied to the presidency, which is the sole purpose for Mabasa being axed.
It's certainly not. I mean, if you look at how the president responded in the interviews that he gave this channel, he said that Jabu Mabasa is a man of integrity.
Absolutely. But then you also, I mean, then that moves over into the realm of the schisms within the ANC itself.
Let's talk about that, Bureaugard. A lot of newspapers are talking about it. We've got here on the front page of the Sunday Times, power struggle inside the latest Eskom dispute. You sit on an advisory panel. Do you think that this is a power play by Didi Mabasa or by Mr. Gwede Mantashe, who makes the all-important decision about the types of energy that we use? He's already agreed, for example, that he agrees with Pravin Gordhan around alternative sources of generation. What is this? Is this a genuine concern to keep the lights on, or is this another attempt to get their hands on what little power remains at the Eskom?
Look, I think a divided ANC has a lot of spillover effects into everything, really. Whether you're talking about, the policy on what is the best, what is the future of Eskom. We also obviously have the elephant in the room, which is the announcement that Eskom is never going to be privatized, obviously to respect the alliance partner that the ANC has with the trade unions. So it's this kind of the schism within the ANC itself in terms of not just policy, but in terms of just what the priorities are. is bound to filter through everything else, and ESCOM is just one of them.
Bureaugard, on Friday, you had a headline that says January for Cyril. And of course, many people interpret the attack on Pravin Gordhan that's coming from the trade unions and some factions inside the African National Congress as a proxy for an attack on the leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa. Is that what your story is arguing? And do you think he's going to be a president that only sits in office for one term?
At this point in time, the position that he holds, there's a real threat of that happening. I think he still carries a lot of goodwill of the people of South Africa, but it is the ANC leadership which will decide that. The argument that we're making is that when you have... He's in a conference here. This is the NGC here, right? And so when we have seen previous ANC presidents deposed, it has really started at the NGC, which precedes conference by 2 years. So when Thabo Mbeki was deposed, it happened 2 years before, really. Ramaphosa actually taking over as president of the ANC. Ramaphosa actually started his campaign 2 years before conference that we saw at Nasrec. So what happens in this year is critical for his longevity. He notes, everybody makes note of the fact that this is a very divided party, and how that actually comes together, how he gets everybody to sing to the same hymn sheet, no one really understands, because there are people with deeply entrenched ideas and interests who are pulling at this presidency.
Yeah. Let's take a look at the Sunday Independent. It says Didi under fire, David Mabasa, who of course in many ways stole the president's thunder by the supposed misspeak about the fact that the president was misled. And what amazed me is that he's the leader of the war room. So was he misled, or did he do the misleading? He's right there in the thick of things. What do you make of Mr. Mabuza's power play here? Does he want to take over from Cyril Ramaphosa as soon as possible? And is this the first, arrow across the bow?
I think for me, it's a difficult one to call, because I think where it matters the most, you see the deputy president's, support around the president. So what seems to be happening from a distance is that...
But they say salt and sugar looks the same, but it tastes very different.
Look, if you don't know the difference between sugar and salt, there's something wrong with you.
I like brown sugar.
So... a very intricate power play, but an early power play. And so often, Bureaugard, timing in politics is everything.
Absolutely.
Did Mabasa come out too early, do you think?
I don't know. For me, this is very interesting. I mean, the man was being made fun of in Parliament just a few months ago.
Yeah, for not understanding the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Look,
can this man really
to be
lead the
honest,
ANC?
you know, what Rosie was asking him, I have no idea what he was talking about. Most people, I don't think. But this is the first time that we are seeing in a few years now, we're seeing Didi Mabasa flexing publicly. The last time we saw him this powerful or this involved or this overtly involved was at the conference which elected Cyril Ramaphosa. So no, I think that if this is what is to come ahead of the NGC, this is the right time for him to do that.
Remember that I must mention that he is also heading up the land reform program. So his office...
I mean, he's head of government business.
Exactly. So I don't think that he is as shy to show his hand as we think he has been. I think he's very shrewd, and I think he plays his cards close to his chest, but I think there's no doubt that he's not, that he's we can assume that he's got absolutely no ambition. I think it's there.
But Bureaugard, I see you nodding your head, but the art of waging war is, of course, to not be seen to be fighting.
Yes.
And when the war comes, to have already won the battles that requires you to win the war. Didi Mabasa, in many ways, have been lured out of the shadows.
Because remember that Didi Mabasa, other than, he also is now in charge of energy generation. He's in charge of deployment for the ANC. He has all these powerful positions, but up until this point, we have not... The assumption was that he is not able to exert any power. The shots are being called by the president. He's running roughshod over Ramaphosa. Or that Ramaphosa is running roughshod over him, right? And so that is why maybe I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, what we are seeing now is him possibly moving out of that shadow and needing to actually assert himself in that manner.
Absolutely. Now, let's go to the issue around Eskom. The board chair has resigned. We expect a board chairperson to be called. But we saw Cosatu was saying they're not satisfied with one person resigning. They want the entire board to go. NUMSA just was the latest trade union movement, even though it's outside of the fraternity of the alliance, coming out. Cosatu hasn't actually met its first Central Executive Committees in February, but significant players in this sphere, in the energy field, unions have come out. What do you make of Cosatu's power play? They were the biggest cheerleaders of President Ramaphosa.
Yeah. Look, it's going to be interesting. I think whatever happens with the future of Eskom, the reality of South African politics and the landscape is that the unions are intertwined, and that whatever plans we have for the future have to be, have to resonate with what the workers want, because they're in such a powerful position to either promote or hamstring whatever plans that we have. The questions around the methodology, whether you're going to separate transmission and generation and all of that, we shouldn't be too concerned about semantics. When the president says, I can assure you there's not going to be any privatization of Eskom, what does it actually mean? And what does it actually mean for workers? So I think we need to start seeing, instead of, using language that is not, clear, let's clarify it. Let's say what does the future of Eskom look like, and when we say we're going to separate these three divisions, what does it actually mean?
Okay, Bureaugard, before we go any further, let's take a listen to the president of Cosatu, Zini Swalose, on what they want at Eskom.
We welcome the resignation of Jabu Mabasa, the former Eskom board chairperson. You will remember that Cosatu, since August last year, has called for the entire board of Eskom to step down. We are saying to the rest of the board, do the honorable thing and tender your resignation and follow suit.
Now, Bureaugard, the Cosatu Federation has vested interest in who is on the board. Its union, the National Union of Mine Workers, has vested interest. They are attached to coal. They're talking about a just transition. They are opposed to independent power producers. Do we necessarily give them the power to influence the president at the exclusion of other social partners making their case as well? Because the truth of the matter is coal and the poor quality of coal isn't sustainable. We've seen the bushfires in Australia destroy almost a continent. Are the trade unions behind the times?
Look, we must also remember that the trade unions largely represent many of the most vulnerable people in our country. So we can sit in our very comfortable homes and pontificate about workers and the like, but we must understand who the trade unions represent, and we must not go and say, yeah, but we all got to work together on this. Yeah, but they have more to lose. The people who they represent, remember who the trade unions represent. They have more to lose. At the same time, I don't think that the president listens to them at the exclusion of any other partners. I think that they are part of the conversation. They are a critical part of the conversation that has become muted for too long. At the same time, we cannot just say, we're going to jump out of coal and get IPPs and sun, solar, whatever else, hydro. We actually have to transition because there are lives at stake here, families at stake here, communities at stake here. Mpumalanga will go up like that. Barbara Creasy speaks about this, So we have to be cognizant of what's really at stake here. Yes, Eskom admits, and this is probably a very conservative estimate, coal kills more than 300 people per year, lives lost. That's at a cost of something like 18 billion rand to the economy. So at the same time, can you imagine the hundreds of thousands of jobs and other dependents of coal who go under if there's no more coal tomorrow. So we have to transition.
It's a phase process.
Absolutely.
But Bulelwa, you're talking about a phase process. We're talking about this just transition process. But when we do that, we obviously have to ask all the constituencies to put their sectoral interests one side and act in the national interest, isn't it?
Yes, sure. I think there's this misnomer that if you're going to deal with difficult positions, it's either black or white.
Yes.
It's either coal or IPPs. I think that's incorrect. I think we've got to look at the full spectrum of possibilities. The IPPs do provide opportunities for, up-and-coming black industrialists, for example. You've got to look at, beneficiation of the industry. You've got to look at how you're going to incorporate even the huge numbers of workers into part of even kind of promoting them into becoming stakeholders as opposed to just providing just mere labor. So I think it's, difficult questions require a myriad of solutions and all at the same time. So it's not stop coal and start this, but it's a phased process of an inclusive process that may include, IPPs and so on, hydro, solar and so on. So because I think there are other stakeholders, as you were saying, like emerging commercial players that are crying out for this part of the economy to open up.
Let's shift gears now away from Eskom, but stay with state-owned companies. One of the tabloids today says that the Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula, is in the middle of a drama around the board, partly because the decisions about who to be appointed didn't necessarily go according to the script that he wanted to. Now, that's precisely what this governing party has been accused of, that it doesn't actually put together competent boards. What it does is that it arranges jobs for pals. Now, how is Cyril Ramaphosa going to instill confidence? In fact, any faction, whether it's Didi Mabuza or others, if examples such as what Fikile Mbalula is involved in is still making front page news on a Sunday.
Yeah. From my point of view, look, the PRASA board has been wholly ineffectual. There have been so many reports which they haven't acted on. And we see PRASA, the most obvious example or physical example we see is people standing at a station for half a day trying to get to work.
Or burning of trains.
Or burning of trains. And we see, just the other day they arrested 2 kids. And you can't tell me that they're responsible for all of this billions and billions of rands of damage. But we have. I think Eskom and PRASA are good examples, because when Ramaphosa came in, there was a belief that, look, now we're going to see better governance, cleaner governance, but then there's this attempt to actually act overtly. For instance, at Eskom, you had a situation where the board is actually micromanaging. You can't have that. We're seeing now slowly Eskom turning around and they're saying, like, okay, now director, you're going to appoint all your people that you need and you're going to make this work. And if it doesn't work, of course, we're going to come for you.
But yet, it is the unions that is paying for the blood of the political head.
Yes.
But
Absolutely.
the board is saying, why are you keep on interfering? You've appointed us, let us do our work. The executives are saying, stop interfering, board, let us do our work. So the blame game is actually still continuing.
Absolutely. And what this all boils down to is this issue of a capable state. We heard the president talk about the reorganization of SOEs
into the council
and decision making. What this all boils down to is that if you're going to have a national vision for the country, everybody needs to sing from the from the same hymn sheet. So in other words, you can't have a separate or rather a process strategy that does not speak to what Eskom is doing, that does not speak to integration and the unification of all these missions and visions that speak to one another, but also where you kind of curtail the ability of people to act outside of whatever hymn sheet you've all agreed to.
Bureaugard, I always ask myself whether the ministers that serve in President Ramaphosa's cabinet sit in the same cabinet meeting. Because when you speak with them, it's as if they are in their own little bubbles and they don't actually speak together, even though they tweet pictures of 4 different ministries together attacking a very urgent issue, or the deputy president, the president, as well as the Minister of Energy, as well as the Minister of Public Enterprises in a meeting, getting in there, rolling up their sleeves. This disconnect, what is the source of it? Is it the leadership of Ramaphosa that is weak, or is it just the fact that ANC ministers are fighting for turf?
I think it's a bit of both. I don't think Ramaphosa wants to be weak. I think that he's a politician. He realizes he can push so far and he can pull so much. And so this is not, and that's with any president. You know, the cabinet that you appoint is not just, you know, who I think is best. This is a consultation, and it's always been with the ANC. The ANC is in one of those situations, one of those periods in time right now where the president is having to consult ever more, and there are so many people taking divergent paths. The ANC has been here before, and they've been able to pull it back together. But the problem is that now you are a government, and you have to actually go, and the repercussions are felt so much more than beyond, so much further beyond the party.
Yeah, the navel gazing inside the ANC actually has real implications for people who want to switch on the lights and who want to have clean drinking water. Babawa, Bulelwa, my apologies. Bulelwa and Bureaugard, thank you so very much for your time. That's where we will leave it. You've had your fix for the week. See you again next week. Thank you for watching.